Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. I continue my conversation with Greg Foster, the co-founder and CTO of graphite.dev. In this part, Greg shares about AI's role in code review as a reviewer, as a collaborator for people, about enhancing documentation, and the potential of AI in testing and debugging. He also touches upon the limitations of AI. And as usual, I asked him about career advice, and he talks about embracing AI as a tool, about focusing on human skills, and about why it is important to keep learning continuously, and about finding your flow. Listen on. I'm curious about the AI part that you mentioned in the reviews.
Sure.
Is that your own knowledge base that you've built, or what does it?
Yeah, we've been experimenting. So we're actually just we're aiming to roll out in a month or so, but we currently have a private beta for a Graphite reviewer feature within the product that every single pull request that teams are creating, if they opt in, not everyone likes AI, but if you opt in, we can scan and essentially we'll run it through a sequence of classic LLM models, different questions. We'll use RAG, so retrieval augmentation generation. We'll look at older pull requests. We'll look at other code changes in the code base, and we'll ask questions about it. We'll say, okay, hey, is there an obvious typo? Is there an obvious bug? Maybe you're adding an endpoint, but are you adding an endpoint in the way that people on this team traditionally add endpoints? Maybe it's valid independently, but this is not how it's done in this code base. And we're trying to ask a sequence of questions that are actually kind of similar to what a human reviewer is asking themselves as they're reading through this code change. Is this meant to replace human code review? Definitely not. Definitely not. I do not think the world is ready to drop human code review, but it does run in about 10 seconds, which is faster than your CI runs, and it's way faster than your teammate getting around to leaving you a review. And we find it's a false positive rate is very low. It's actually when it leaves a comment, it's pretty accurate, and it allows the developer to quickly just fix up some changes. It decreases the chance that it's going to get flagged by someone else, a real human, makes it the reviewer's life a little easier. It speeds up the life cycle of that pull request, just getting people faster feedback. And also sometimes it's very good at spotting little nitpicks that a tired reviewer might gloss over. I think humans are fantastic at looking at the bigger picture, but this is actually very good at looking at the small details. One way to think about it is like a AI-powered linter. We have linters in the world. They do an amazing job, but they're actually quite tricky to configure and write. They're a little bit brittle. This is a kind of a fuzzy linter of sorts. So we're finding we have it rolled out to about, I think, 100 customers at the moment, but we're going to expand it more broadly. It's very exciting.
Yeah. But when it comes to code reviews, there's also a need to understand the context. Why some of the architectural decisions were taken, or why you need to do something in a probably non-standard way, or probably for optimization or performance and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So how does this reviewer get the context while reviewing change, or at least understanding the impact of change?
So, I mean, the short answer is it's not very good at that. It does an okay job. How does it get a little bit of the context? It's looking at the descriptions of older pull requests. It can look at the comments that were left on older pull requests. It can actually, if it looks and says, okay, great, we're modifying this area of the code, let's look at all the discussions that have happened historically. Surprisingly, the AI can glean a little bit of understanding of the bigger picture, but I'm not going to lie, that's not its strong suit. Its strong suit is catching small logical bugs or nits within the code, stylistic changes, things like that. When I think about a code, just a broad sense of a code review, I think you're looking, the whole point of it is a couple of different facets. One is, yes, style enforcement and hopefully like spotting a couple of bugs. But it's education, it's knowledge sharing, it's understanding what are your teammates doing in the code base. It's trying to facilitate, like you just said, discussions about the broader reasoning of like, why are we doing this way? There's probably 3 correct ways we could do it, but like we're choosing to do it this way. This is part of a multi-month effort. We're trying to grow the code base in this direction. I don't think the AI is going to get that angle of the conversations anytime soon. And even if it could, I'd still want a human in the loop. One, because I think it's wonderful for context sharing, just understanding what is happening, how's the code base evolving. I think review is still important for that. And then 2, from a security standpoint, one of the benefits of code review is to just make sure your teammate is not so malicious that they're just like injecting in vulnerabilities into the code base. It's helpful to have another person just double checking everything. And I think AI is too gullible to actually defend against meaningful like security injections. So for a couple of these reasons, I definitely think we're always going to have humans reviewing it, but we also still have humans review things, but we still have CI running, testing it. We still have linters running. If you tell me that we also get into a world where you also have an LLM scanning every code change, totally believe it. It's just going to be another layer of defense trying to spot issues.
Now, when we talk about code reviews, there are broadly 2 buckets. One is about the functionality, and the other what we call as the non-functional requirements, whether it is security or performance, etc.
Yeah.
Where do you think automated systems can do better?
So you're saying the functional requirements of like, is this actually, is the code change going to affect what we're hoping it's going to affect? And then the non-functional stuff of, is this making the code base net worse? Is this injecting a vulnerability? Is this incorrect in the style? So on. I think that it's a little of both. It's a little in both buckets, but it's only part of the story of both buckets. So from a functionality standpoint, we see it catch lots of little logical bugs. Someone's got a ternary statement and they've messed it up. And logically, and usually like that's where actually the LLM is very good at reading that. And a human might not parse it very well, but the computer is very good at parsing it and says, hey, you're assigning this variable with a very descriptive name, but based on what's going on in this if statement or this ternary statement, it's not going to happen. And it'll call it out. And that's great. That's actually wonderful because humans are bad at seeing that. That's a little bit on like the functionality side. And then on the non-functional side, it's actually very good at serving like a style linter and saying, stylistically, this part of the code could be restructured a little bit. Maybe this function's a little bit long. You're using the wrong casing in your variable names. Really simple stuff that, to be honest, humans do still comment on. We're now talking the world of like style nits, and it's sometimes hard to get linters generic enough to really call out like all the things that exist within a team's style guide. But people still choose to leave comments. People will still go back, fix their code change, and resubmit it to match these styles. And that's, I think, a fantastic area of labor that we can totally automate away. And that I want the reviewer to be focusing on the bigger picture stuff and not worrying about having to leave comments on like little nitpicks here and there. If the AI can totally automate that, I think that's the best thing. So I would say those are the 2 best buckets for it to be catching on: small logical mistakes and stylistic changes, and still really leaning heavily on the humans for security, big picture, architectural decisions, so on.
Yeah, that's reassuring to hear that humans are still needed.
We're not out of a job yet.
Over time, I'm sure that the model will start identifying some patterns.
What's interesting, one thing we've already seen in our own experimentation working on this is the context windows have gotten so much larger. So just a year ago, I think the average context windows were about 4,000 or maybe 8,000 tokens. And that's enough to feed in 200 to maybe 1,000 lines of code. That's not that much. So how much code can I put into a question and then ask an LLM to give me feedback on? Now, like less than a year later, these context windows are already about 1 million tokens wide. So suddenly I can feed in, a huge pull request and also 10 other related pull requests. And if you tell me that like context windows grow to be 10 million, 100 million, I'm not positive, but like if these keep growing, there could be a certain point in the future where you just give it the whole code base and then you just start asking it questions like, hey, here's the code base, here's the new code diff. Does this make sense? Does this fit in? So if you were to extend out this line, it just gets really, really smart, and it might be better and better at understanding the big picture too. Today, it's understanding the small picture, but I'm curious personally at how far we can take this. I keep redefining my expectations at what exists today, and then you read some new press release, and you're like, oh, I guess the thing that used to be impossible is now also possible. So I don't know. Maybe in a year or two, it'll be even smarter, and everything I'm telling you right now, I'm saying it's good at small things. Maybe that'll be invalidated too. We'll see.
Yeah, even with these small patterns or small maybe indicators that it picks up, is it possible to train the human reviewers? Or better still, use that to train developers so that you try to prevent some of these things from happening?
Are you saying like, can we use the AI to help reviewers get a little bit better at spotting common mistakes so that they can also do their jobs better on the human side? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, somewhat like that. Let me say one of my experiences has been when you review code, after some time, you kind of expect a certain signature or a pattern from a developer. So if somebody is submitting code, you know that this person is probably going to prefer to use these kind of constructs or is likely to make these mistakes or things like that, which you spot only with experience. Now, can a tool like this accelerate that experience time? That I don't have to go through all this to understand this, but then probably somehow quickly pick up broadly where the issues could be.
I think, yeah, it's curious. So we're thinking about, the different stylistic patterns that people pick up and then our own pattern recognition of those stylistic patterns. I think it actually does an okay job of this, and I see it go in two directions. So one, there's a normalization that can happen here, which is one thing that can happen is across a bigger company, you have different teams and different writers, right? And you'll often have a small silo of people reading and reviewing each other's code. You're going to have deviations of patterns and stylistics parts of writing code. One team, one module in the code base, it's going to start looking pretty different than other teams and other people. And then some companies they do microservice architecture or polyrepo architecture, and they lean into that and they'll say all these different silos and modules, let's let them be weird and different and so on. But one benefit you could choose to leverage with some of this AI review is more of a standardization, because you're actually saying that there's one style of reviewer. It's kind of like a style guide that's actually correctly enforced. So many times you have a style guide that's not actually meaningfully enforced. But if you actually have an automated reviewer, which is applying the same bar to everyone and leaving the same genre of comments to everyone, you might get a more consistent code base, which I think at a company can be quite useful. It allows people to move around a little bit better, to understand things a little bit better. That's one angle. Now back to the individuality angle, I also think simultaneously, it can also help understand the nuances of individuals a little bit better, because we talked about RAG a little bit, that retrieval side of the generation. And a really common pattern is to fetch related code changes from the same authors or the same comments from the same reviewers and bring those into this new pull request and then leave feedback on it. And then you can start saying it's kind of like one step below actually training a model on every single engineer. If we don't want that's a little overkill. So if we didn't want to train a model on every engineer, what if we just in real time grabbed similar changes and we looked at the style of how they're writing those changes, or the style of how they're leaving comments, and we're like, great, now let's generate a new comment, or let's consider this code change in the style of that specific author. And we're able to leverage that in a way that, you're right, if you and I reviewed each other's code, I don't have a year of understanding your pattern styles or preferences. But this reviewer from scratch might be able to. Why? Because it can fetch and read every code change you've left, and it can do it in a second, which I cannot do as a human. So it can kind of extend both ends of the individuality question.
That's really going to be big breakthrough in terms of the collective knowledge coming together.
Yeah.
Most of the time, the teams have a lot of developers, but probably a part-time architect.
Yeah.
Either because architects are so scarce to find. But then something like this could probably be an extension of the architect, still not leave out the architect, but at least do some of the preliminary work so that the pieces coming together would probably work better.
Absolutely, and I think we see some really interesting like use cases that we haven't actually built out, but we're starting to see the possibilities here. They're really fascinating. It's now you can now also build question and answer bots about the code base. So if you're a new developer and you're like, hey, I want to write a new endpoint, I want to write a new log statement. How do I do it in this code base? It's actually pretty easy for one of these bots to read everything and give you that answer. Before, that was a junior developer tapping a senior developer on the shoulder and breaking their flow. But now you can build bots to help answer these smaller questions. You can also do things like scan the entire code base and look for inconsistencies retroactively. So rather than doing it on a new PR level, you just say, okay, here's the code base as it is. Please review this and tell me, across all of our endpoints, across all of our log statements or whatever, are there, maybe 90% of them are pretty good and pretty consistent. Are there any existing bugs? Are there any inconsistencies in the style? Is there a hot spot in the code that we should really take a crack at maybe refactoring? Where is the architecture inconsistent? And a human could do that. You could tell a human, hey, please spend 2 weeks and do nothing but read my code base and look for inconsistencies. Or you could like scan a bot through it. And it does a pretty good job. It's actually interesting. We've tried this on our own internal code base because we're developing this stuff. And it'll retroactively spot bugs that have already been existing in our code base and that we hadn't spot before. We'll put a style guide and it'll flag things. And we'll be like, oh crap, we were just testing this, but like we should actually go fix that. That's a real thing. So it's unlocking these new interesting tools and patterns that I've never even thought about. I think it would be maybe too arduous, or just as humans, we're a little too lazy to go do. We think would be a good idea, but we don't have time to go do it. And if you have some of the stuff, the bot has time. We can go set the bot on it.
That's an interesting point about not having time. Many times I've heard developers say that I don't have time to document.
Yeah.
So would this lead to a day where we don't need to write documentation, just code, and somebody can figure it out?
It could be nice, right? I mean, will it write the doc? So if it has enough context, because this human still in their brain knows why they did the thing. The AI knows what's happening. It may not know why, because why is either in your brain or in a meeting or on a whiteboard. So it needs that part. But if you can lazily tell it in like, just little notes like, why am I doing this? I think it can help document. And the other thing it can do, which is a little easier, is it can tell you when the documentation needs updating. I think something that developers, myself included, we're all very bad at is maybe eventually we'll document something, but then 3 months later, I'm updating some features and I forget to update the docs because now I'm inconsistent. Wouldn't it be great if the AI could look at that pull request and be like, hey, by the way, you should this paragraph in the docs doesn't make sense anymore given this new code change that you're shipping. You should update it, or I'm actually going to suggest an update to your documentation. That's totally possible. And again, you still need that human to give it a little bit of the why, a little bit of the broader context. But we can definitely, I think, we can level up documentation. There's a lot of room to level up docs, and I think this is a great area for it.
Yeah. Extension of this could probably be the patterns in terms of nowadays we have so many different technologies and components that are pieced together. And with the microservice architecture kind of approaches, you're integrating with the services that are not within your organization boundary.
Yes.
And one is, of course, building for those complexities and testing end to end. Like the example you gave between what you did and what Twilio did and what Solution did and so on. Can this be extended to model those kind of scenarios to at least debug and find out where the chain is breaking?
Oh, that's a good question. You're asking, okay, when engineering these systems, of course we have external dependencies. For us, it's like GitHub is one of our biggest ones. We have some on AWS. We do email and we don't do SMS. We do emails as well. So you're right. We have these third-party systems that are part of our production functionality. They're hard to test conventionally. In part, I think what you're asking is like, are there better patterns? Can AI help us a little bit here? Man, step one, it's just hard. It's just hard when you have these large stateful external dependencies. I think the best thing anyone can do is get the architecture right, the early stages. There's some classic Uncle Bob books like Clean Code, Clean Architecture that talk about this in depth, about how do you take those external dependencies and separate your business logic and protect yourself and put interfaces in between so that you have a little bit of testability, a little bit of separation. That's part of it. But can we go further than that? It's a good question. I haven't thought too hard about it.
What crossed my mind was
Yeah.
if I can read the document, the release notes from the other release that's going to happen, let's say the email service provider, and then anticipate, okay, now that those are the changes that are being made in that system, what should I watch out for? Or what could be possibly just trying to connect things, because now we can do it a little faster and probably in a larger scale.
Yeah. I definitely think you can spot. That's a great point. Like reading release notes, reading the documentation, comparing it back to your actual implementation, and trying to spot, hey, is there something you're missing? Is there something you're not accounting for? Is there a behavior on this external endpoint that you're calling that you're not considering? Because again, we as humans, we're bad at reading stuff. We skim stuff. We're bad at getting the details right.
Yeah.
I think that could definitely help. And this is where I think the superpower of this of all of this AI stuff is in the way that we see it, in the way that we're using it. It's not catching every mistake. It's not very good at 100% true positive. I think unit tests, stuff like that, they catch every mistake. They're deterministic. But it is pretty good at catching some mistakes and some very fuzzy mistakes that you were just not going to catch otherwise. Why? Because you didn't write a test or you couldn't write a test. So I think the value is if this can catch 25% of your mess ups because you didn't read the docs, that's pretty cool still. And does this mean I no longer need other forms of tests? No, because I still need other ways to cover the other 75% I'm missing. But if it randomly catches some stuff, it's net improvement of value. I'm going to like it. I'm not going to be upset about it. As long as the false positive rate is low. And honestly, what we see, we do see a low false positive rate. It doesn't mess up a lot. It doesn't hallucinate too much. So that's that. It's interesting. It's like, it's a bit fuzzy. It catches stuff without much configuration, which is beautiful, but simultaneously, it's not very good at catching everything. So you need to play both sides. You're going to need a combination of strategies here.
I didn't realize that we are nearing the end of our conversation, but I must ask you for some tips, more like career tips. People are now talking about low-code, no-code environments, as well as generated code. In these kind of scenarios, is there a role for a developer? We asked you that question, but still I will ask that question. When particularly somebody who's say fresh out of school, considering a career, should they consider being a developer or something else?
Oh, I would just strongly vote yes. I think there's so much room for good software engineering, good development in the future. Yes, there's low code, no code. Yes, AI is starting to actually write some code, which is scary. However, I don't think this stuff is going away. I don't think the world has yet saturated engineers and technology. It was a little scary because we're already pretty tech heavy in the world, but I don't think we've reached the peak of this. I think there's opportunity, there's value in people getting out there, learning the skill set and creating new things. There's so many problem areas that are not yet tackled or not yet solved. And I look at this AI stuff, I look at these modern innovations that are happening, and I don't get afraid that they're going to destroy software engineering as a craft. Rather, I think they're creating opportunities and technical overhang where there's new stuff people can go and build today that's relatively straightforward, but there's not enough people even building in the first place. So there's actually more opportunity, I think, than there has been in the past. Everything we're talking about, it's not a reason to not become a developer. It's a reason to become a developer. I also think it's one of the easier times in history to learn. When I was learning to code, when you were learning to code, it was getting a book at Borders and trying to flip through the pages and trying to learn C and stuff. Now it's like you can have ChatGPT walk you through line by line exactly what's going on wrong. Explain it to me like I'm a child. Tell me where my bug is. That's great. I think it's gotten a little easier, and that's not a bad thing. We should lean into that. But I think I would strongly encourage my friends and other people to continue learning engineering.
The second part of the question is for people who might be in their midlife crisis. Yeah,
Mm,
doing all this, should I continue to be, particularly those who want to stay technical?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
there comes a time when they feel that now probably this is not going to take me further. Let me become a manager, or let me
Mm,
do something else. So, if one wants to continue to be technical, what would be
yeah.
your advice for those people to stay relevant?
Mm,
All these changing technologies and the myriad combinations that we have.
interesting. Yeah, if you want to stay technical, if you're considering should I stay as an IC software engineer and not go into management or not shift my careers, I think step one, double check what you really love. Double check what gives you energy, what gives you flow. Is this something you really enjoy? Is this always been a grind, or have you always liked it and now you're just concerned about switching? I've been lucky enough to try both management and software engineering, and I gotta say, being an IC software engineer is pretty great. Being a manager sounds good on paper, but almost everyone I know, once they've done both, they're like, yep, being a software engineer is a pretty great role. You get flow, you get passion, you get autonomy and creativity. It's really wonderful. How do you keep investing in that? I think there's two axes. So one, continuing to create side projects or work projects that use the modern technologies that are playing around with React and TypeScript and maybe dabbling a little bit with some of these AI tools. Not so much that say that these are replacing and invalidating older systems and older technologies, but to just understand them. I think to have an opinion on something, you got to play with it. You got often to then realize that the old thing is really good for some reason and that the new thing is shiny, but there's a reason the old thing is still around. I think you got to play with stuff to understand it. That's number one. Number two, I think from a career development standpoint, continuing to level up your project management side of the house. When I work with people who are L3, L4, L5, L6, these are Facebook numbers, junior to senior software engineer to staff plus software engineer. And what I see across the ladder on the more junior end of the spectrum, it's people learning enough technical skills to solve problems and get the job done. But on the more senior level, it's the project management side. Can you de-risk a project? Can you estimate it correctly? Can you work with stakeholders, figure out some disconnect, and then resolve it? Can you take a big area of ambiguity and define a project within it that's high value and then sell people on that project? That's the area of skills that I sometimes see people get really good at the technical side and then stall out on their growth on the project management side. And that's what's going to lift you from senior to staff plus. And I think there's so much room that's interesting. That's an interesting area of growth. It's not management, it's still within the IC track. So I would encourage people to invest in that side of the house as well.
That's great. But based on what you said, I have one more curiosity question.
Please, please.
You mentioned flow a couple of times.
Yeah.
Right? So do you have or do you follow any personal practices to help you get into and stay in flow?
Shiv, I am running a startup and I'm acting as an engineering manager right now. My flow is gone. I miss it. I remember it fondly. I have no flow these days, but no, for flow, what is flow? Flow is that optimal intersection of being challenged enough that you're engaged, but you're not hitting such a stalling roadblock that you just throw up your hands and go take a walk. And how do you find those moments? I mean, you can do your best to create them. You can create an environment where you won't be disrupted. You can put your favorite music on your headphones, and you can start diving into a technical problem that meets those criteria. That's not so challenging that you need to stall out, go for a walk and ask for help, but it's not so easy that it doesn't engage you. And if you can find that sweet spot, that's how you're going to unlock the flow. I actually think in software engineering, that's actually more the common case. The other ends of the spectrum exist, but one of the reasons software engineers get so much flow, I think coders get like hours of flow every day, and I think it's beautiful. Every other industry wishes they got that. Software engineers, we take it for granted. So I don't think there's too much magic to it. I think it's relatively straightforward as a coder, but I think people take it for granted. I think people should be very appreciative of it.
Yeah. On that note, thanks a lot, Greg, for sharing your story and your perspectives. It's been wonderful.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.